Hey, Sage.
Hi, everyone.
Hello,
Good to
hello.
see you all. Hey, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm currently doing the otter slaughter in the waiting room, so give me 1 minute while I get rid of all the note takers. This will take just a few minutes. Randy, as this is your first time showing up today, we're glad you're here. We get kicked off about 5 after, so we're just going to wait for everyone to join, and we'll get kicked off.
Sounds perfect. Yeah, happy to hold tight.
Hey, Dr. Brian. Good to see you so early in the morning. Hey, Deborah. Good to see you. Hey, Catherine. Good morning to you. I saw you join an hour ago. I was like, oh, am I late for something? And I looked at my calendar. I was like, oh, she was just really early.
Nice to be here.
Okay, I think I get rid of the bot, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the waiting room. Let everyone come in.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning, Dimitra. Or afternoon. I don't know where you are necessarily.
Who's our special guest today? I'm so sorry. I jumped from a social campaigning call to this.
Randy is our
Oh,
special guest today.
Randy. Got it. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Hi, Randy.
Bulgaria. Good to have you here. Hi, everyone. So we're still gonna wait till 5 after. In chat, I went ahead and put a document to today's interview. So if you'd like to go ahead and read a little bit about what Randy's up to and what some of our questions are, here's your chance to get a little bit of a read ahead. At the same token, if you are looking through here and you're like, Sage, why didn't you answer this question? Or Sage, is there other questions you can ask on here? Throw them in chat because your guys' questions are a higher priority than my own questions through here. So as you guys ask questions, I'll definitely try to get your questions covered as well. And be careful not to change my formatting as you're copying and moving stuff around. I see the document changed a little bit there. Careful. Good to see you, Dennis. Good to see you again, Artie.
Hey.
All right, for those who just came in late, we're giving it 1 more minute or so. Here's the document we're going to be reviewing first, or here's Randy's document. Deborah, Montreal, I love it. All right, we're at 5 after. Randy, you ready to go, sir?
As ready as I'm gonna be. Let's do it.
All right, wonderful. So everyone knows we will get more people trickling in. You'll see me cutting and pasting that last message I put in chat. If you see someone come in and you see that I haven't pasted that in chat, if you don't mind, if you can just copy and paste it for the new person as well, I'd appreciate that. So let's get this kicked off. I am very, very excited for our discussion today, and I think that this will be a great discussion for the GRC community as a whole, because Randy, you're doing applied work in a realm that a lot of us aspire to try to work and help solve some of these problems within municipalities. So we are so fortunate to have you here today, Randy. And if you can you give us like a 5 to 10 minute sort of background and catch us up on you and please weave in there those things that that empower you and that you feel really lit up about and where you are today and where you're having needs and or concerns out there. So by all means, the floor is yours, sir.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Sage, and for being so complimentary and appreciative of me being here. It's really an honor just to join the group. Nice to get to know you. Not too long ago, Sage and I connected through a mutual colleague and had the chance to get better acquainted a little while back. So I'm really glad to be here with you and looking forward to kind of getting to know the group through the conversation. And hopefully, from what I understand, this will be more of a conversation than a presentation. So a little bit about myself. I guess traditionally, I would say I have a management consulting background. That's at least where my career started. I fell backwards into the corporate sustainability space, but never really felt comfortable with it. It didn't quite jive for me. To make a long story short, through some experimentation and an opportunity to work with a really neat CEO who was quite a disruptive thinker himself, I came to see sustainability as something different than how it was being portrayed when I originally engaged with it, which would have been like back in 2008. So earlier days, let's say. And for me, sustainability was really about a bigger opportunity. And simply, I saw the possibility of applying a systems lens to how we understand and practice organizational management, um, recognizing that in a roundabout way, I mean, you could really depict conventional organizational management best practice as a gross oversimplification of reality, um, being that it essentially sees the organization largely in a bubble and chooses to engage with the world with a set of blinders on, thinking of the organization as its own entity that is largely unaffected by many external factors that aren't really considered or meaningfully integrated into how management is practiced. And I think, for a long time, organizational management as it exists has been plenty good enough. But here we are. We're about 50 plus years now beyond the first point at which we began overshooting planetary boundaries or the limits of our ecological systems, said another way. And, the science tells us there's a delay. The unintended consequences of exceeding the limits of our planet don't show up immediately. And I would say, we're at a point in human history where we've started to see the fallout. And I think most of you would probably agree, if I'm not assuming too much, that this is very much the tip of the iceberg. But you could say the result of this change is very much depicted in accelerating change and increasingly complex issues emerging. And I would say that this new reality, and one that's getting quickly worse, is finally stretching and challenging the limits of conventional management best practice. So when the world was relatively stable and we were essentially exceeding planetary boundaries without much unintended consequence, conventional organizational management was relatively good enough. And here we are at a point in time where, things are just starting to change and already the utility of conventional management best practice is being challenged. So yeah, essentially I have a couple of affiliations. I grew up or learned within a community of practice over the past 12, 13 years or so. That was originally founded at a design school in Toronto. And essentially the focus of this community of practice is really about reinventing organizational management. So seeing management through a systems lens and in a way that aligns with the natural and social sciences. And I think I would add the nature of this community practice and the innovation that has accumulated within it from different places in the world is not pie in the sky. It's been developed over years and in some cases decades by really smart people who have decades of years of experience working in the field, in consulting organizations, in advisory and management. And so, yeah, the idea is that this sort of shift towards innovations, management innovations that are systemic in nature and science aligned, is not something that is designed in a theoretical way or a way that would immediately sink an organization if they were practiced or applied, but in a manner that's enabling organizations to better navigate the complexity that's unfolding rather than overstepping it and hoping to not be affected by the unintended consequences of, as I mentioned earlier, just sort of having the blinders on. So to get to the point of my affiliations, I was part of this community practice for a long time. I watched many of my colleagues, really smart people who had come up with far future innovations, very slowly trying to disrupt the mainstream. It's not easy to disrupt mainstream management, as I'm sure you understand and would imagine. And yeah, each of them essentially working independently to try and bring an innovation forward that applies to some different facet of management. The recognition was that, one, this was slow and ineffective, and two, that there was an opportunity to do things better. So about 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I helped a couple of the core colleagues to essentially secure some Canadian research funding, which allowed us to establish an applied research institute. And the purpose of the institute, which is called the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, is essentially to bring applied research to the testing of these innovations in the field, and in doing so, accelerate their adoption by, one, building a body of evidence that demonstrates these innovations are better in every way, not just from a sustainability standpoint, but better for a conventionally minded leader who is just trying to navigate the complexity of the world. And as well, to accelerate the learning we need to do in order for the innovations to improve and be adapted to be useful in any context. So of course, there's a lot of complexity involved in reinventing management, and doing so behind closed doors without applying them in practice doesn't mean you have a fully developed and perfect solution at the onset. It takes a lot of field testing and experimentation to really refine and improve an innovation so that it's useful in many different contexts. So the purpose of the Institute, again, is to bring applied research to build evidence to accelerate the process of learning how these innovations need to be adapted and developed. As well, our goal is to create new knowledge. So to publish literature and build, I guess, materials that others can sink their teeth into, and through the process of convening our community and publishing materials to further mobilize and accelerate the adoption of these innovations out in the field. And to some degree, to build a movement. So instead of each of these innovations, something focused on how to plan for the future, another thing focused on how to measure performance or business model, to see these innovations as part of a field of systemic management, which we are building, so that they're part of a whole. And rather than a bunch of disparate innovations, each of which has their own utility, they're seen as innovations that can be used in combination in a way that would accelerate change and help us to navigate the future unfolding. My other affiliation is as the executive director of Refocus. So Refocus is my own nonprofit cooperative, and it's through Refocus that I work directly with organizational leaders to adapt strategic management practices. So facilitating shifts from conventional towards systemic strategic management practices, and through a process that for me is very much an unconsulting practice. The goal is to build capability rather than create dependency, which is typical of most management consultancies. So the two hats are very complementary in that I have an opportunity to experience things in the field and do work directly with leaders and experience the challenges and opportunities that emerge around making change, and then to be part of the research and community building and innovation development that's happening above that. Gives me a pretty helpful perspective in terms of understanding how we might go about smartly making systems change. And maybe I'll pause there. Sage, feel free to prompt me. Or
No, that was great. That was awesome. Let's do real quick. Before we go any further, can you tell me what enterprise evolution is and what it isn't, so we have a level set of understanding before we go into the rest of the interview, please?
For sure. Yeah. So while kind of contemplating the field of innovation that was very much contained inside of this community practice that I described, I had an experience back in 2018 where a colleague and I ended up being solicited to design an executive leadership training program in Norway. and it was on behalf of what they would refer to themselves as an innovation cluster. So this is an NGO responsible for the competitiveness of about 200 small, medium-sized enterprises that work in the offshore drilling and engineering space in the south of Norway. So most of these organizations have been heavily reliant on the state-run offshore drilling organization for the majority of their revenues, essentially milking a cash cow for decades and decades. And as a result, weren't the most innovative organizations in their economy. And so recognizing this, the innovation cluster responsible for the competitiveness of the field decided, they needed to design executive leadership programming or training to help these organizations become more adaptive and innovative and prepared for the future that was unfolding, that was clearly going to disrupt them in the short to midterm. They were really interested in business modeling innovation. They found my colleague. I teamed up with him and we designed an educational program. The pivotal moment for me, where I went from thinking about things from a sustainability lens and how to build better sustainability programs towards a view that we could transform organizations overall, and this is really what led to enterprise evolution, came through an exercise that we engaged in. So we had there's a pilot we ran to start this program with 3 executive leadership teams, and we had each of them sit down and spend an hour and a half defining their approach to strategic planning in excruciating detail. Time horizons on which they plan, the data inputs, who's involved, how it's ongoingly iterated or adapted or not, and just refreshed every so often. All of these details that go into defining how planning happens. We then gave them a couple of hours to, maybe not even that much time, to focus on exploring forces of change that are likely or are already affecting their organization. So we gave them some prompts and put a giant funnel on the wall representing kind of the constraints of the world narrowing on the organization, and had them put little post-it notes up on the wall, each of which had a factor or force of change that they felt might or would affect their organization in the short, mid, and long term. So there was something like 200 or 300 little stickies up on the wall. We had them do the exercise collectively as 3 senior leadership teams, and we just gave them a simple reflection question to discuss. Said, look at what you've defined in your current approach to strategic planning and look back at the wall. And they engaged in dialogue, and all 3 of those leadership teams had what I describe as their holy crap moment, where for the first time, having the opportunity to contemplate the totality of what was changing and shifting in the world as it related to their organization, and at the same time reflecting on what they're doing to navigate the future, as in to plan, they could see not only was their planning practice inadequate, it was just straight up irresponsible given the conditions that were already here. And so in that moment, they all said, like, what do we do? All of a sudden very interested in rethinking management practice at the most strategic level. So that's where the switch flipped for me. And I saw this opportunity, with a dialogic sort of narrative-based approach, that we could help leaders to shift mindsets. And in doing so, create an openness to experimenting and adapting practices in a really fundamental way. So like nothing of what we talked about was focused on sustainability or regeneration. It was just about navigating complexity and understanding the necessity of applying a systems lens to making sense of that future. Sage, please.
Yeah, real quick. Those post-it notes you put on the wall, let me just ask you, those are the post-it notes that they, from their own voice, identified as tripwires or things that could happen. Were there environmental mixed in with that as well? Like, I want to know the spectrum of those things. Was it governmental? Was it environmental? Was it a whole plethora of the whole spectrum? Tell me a little more about that real quick.
Yeah, so to get them started, we had this slide that I think a big consultancy had published showing like the 10 or 12 mega forces of change in the world that were kind of relationally depicted. And they stretched everything from politically oriented to culturally oriented to environmentally oriented. And of course, different economic factors, supply chains, et cetera. And so, yeah, we basically just said, look, you're smart people. You follow the news. You know what's happening in your communities and around the world and your supply chains, blah, blah, blah. You know, write down anything that you think will affect them. And of course, they considered environmental factors amongst many others. The point was to be exhaustive and not to be too concerned with what you're going to do or how this gets dealt with, but just to really consider what could affect the organization.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, cheers. No worries. So enterprise evolution, right? Enterprise evolution. What we did in Norway, this senior leadership training program, which was about building better strategy and becoming more innovative, was almost like enterprise evolution version 1.0. We just didn't have it titled as such when it was first designed, but that's essentially what it was. And what occurred for me as we went through this program was we didn't need to, and we certainly couldn't limit effective programming to just planning for the future. We needed to address all management functions. These leaders were asking, like, what do we do about how we measure performance? What data do we collect? How does that inform strategy? How do teams work together? How do we think about our supply chain and engage with it? So for me, all of a sudden, enterprise evolution was this integrating frame that was essentially designed to steward a transition from conventional towards systemic practice and to facilitate the process of building the capabilities and confidence necessary to function in a very different way. And in creating that integrating frame, what was exciting for me was all of a sudden all of the innovations that my various colleagues who are within the Flourishing Enterprise Institute's community of practice, all of them were relevant at the same time. You know, I could talk to any given leader about their interests in the different facets of management and I introduce or highlight different innovations that would or could be useful depending on where they're motivated and so forth. That said, I want to be clear, Enterprise Evolution as a program is designed to be entirely tailored and flexible. You know, our recognition is that generally speaking, leaders don't sign up to transition their entire organization from conventional towards systemic strategic management practices overnight. There is generally an entry point of some kind, you know, a motivation, an initial need or challenge that they're addressing. In the case of the Norwegian organizations, it was better strategy, could be a complex systemic issue that they're struggling to respond to. And essentially, it's
The
just
purpose of time, just because we're running a little long on just this portion of it,
please.
can you talk briefly on how you've taken the evolution into the municipality arena and can we summarize sort of like the benefit and sort of those aha moments that you felt you received there as well?
Yeah, I think what's interesting for me about the municipal sector is, you know, municipalities are already explicitly mandated to pursue outcomes across the triple bottom line. And as such, they're an ideal type of organization to see value in this sort of systemic practice. But also municipalities, if we think about our world as a complex adaptive system, I think one, it's worth acknowledging that it's necessary to solve issues at a local scale because there's so much variation and diversity in the kinds of issues that we face. So place-based approaches to addressing our needs are very necessary. And municipalities within a local context may very well represent the highest leverage point for making systems change. I would personally suggest they are for a whole host of reasons. And perhaps even further, municipalities don't really compete and build intellectual property. They generally share best practice. And there are many networks and organizations across the globe who are very good at establishing that best practice and disseminating it across municipalities. So I would say if you want to change quickly, the municipal sector is a great one to focus on. Now, in terms of the opportunity and how enterprise evolution or EE fits within that space, I think my recognition is that looking at the literature historically and for the past 3 or 4 decades, municipalities were designed based on a paradigm of management called the New Public Management, which essentially extracted or took conventional business practices and repurposed them for government, making municipalities essentially glorified service delivery optimization organizations. And I think what has organically happened over the last couple decades has been that a new purpose of government has emerged, which is much more focused on enabling the well-being of communities that municipal government serves. And the design of the organization as a service delivery optimization entity is just not a match. It's not fit for purpose. And so even when municipalities explicitly, outwardly, authentically claim their commitment to environmental outcomes and outcomes related to social well-being, the governance of the organization, the ways of thinking about the future, the ways budgets are allocated, decisions are made, they collaborate with outside entities, are not designed to optimize for the outcomes they're trying to produce.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, we're going to go start with some questions here in chat. Catherine asked about how does this governance from this perspective embrace the biotic pump, but I don't know this is really governance. This is sort of a facilitation. Catherine, do you want to come off mute and sort of rephrase that based on what we're talking about now?
Yeah, for me, the biotic pump is one of the resilience strategies that a municipality needs to embrace in order to ensure that it can deal with the coming heat and dryness. So I do see it as a strategic approach, and it's systemic, and governance has a lot to say about how that happens in the space that it's managing. So I'm just wondering if you've looked at that or if that's been part of your conversation.
Yeah, so I think we are talking about maybe two different levels. Our interest is to adapt strategic management practices, as in how the organization thinks about the future, makes decisions, allocates budgets. We're not really in the business of engineering solutions or, adapting infrastructure specifically. There are many organizations with those areas of expertise. Our hope would be that the way that a problem is or a challenge is considered and the approach to addressing that thoughtfully and meaningfully would be such that the pump that you're describing might actually be valued with a fair understanding of the potential benefit or of pursuing it, or the unintended consequence of not doing anything or taking a more linear or reactive approach that perhaps is less systemic.
Catherine, any follow up there? Catherine, you're digesting. I'll let you digest for just.
Yeah, for me, that impacts budgets, it impacts ordinances, it impacts charges to departments, just lots of areas. So I'm just confused at the way you're separating it. It just doesn't make sense to me.
So if I can I'm going to provide a little color commentary on this one. I think what Randy's really describing on this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, is Randy's looking at the process to try to help municipalities and enterprise build their own perspective of thinking as a whole systems approach, not to prescribe certain things they should be focusing on, but really focus on the process of self-evolution and facilitating those aha moments from those individual actors in that. I think one of the problems that we do see is a lot of times when people try to approach these, we do try to project and push certain solutions that we feel are valuable. And a lot of times that may poison what we're trying to do as a whole, because then we're biased in the whole process versus facilitating a process. That's a hard one to manage, Randy, I believe. And you can go into that more if you'd like yourself.
It's a bit of a rabbit hole. I would say maybe if you want to think about it from an organizational perspective, there's an entire system of management that decides what solutions are invested in and how decisions are made. And it has to do with power, with what's valued, with what data is collected, with how people convene and discuss things, who they're responsible to. Like there's many factors that affect or that are ingrained in the design of the system of management. We're interested in affecting the mindsets of leaders so that they see that the entire system of management that they are relying on to do what they do or meet their mandate is not aligned with what they're trying to accomplish, and to help them to adapt that system of management at the highest level to allow for a very different set of outcomes to emerge that are more authentic and connected to what they're trying to accomplish. Again, so an individual solution like the one you're describing inside of that new system of management would show up as a more valuable solution than it would. And it wouldn't be limited to that solution. Any solution that is more systemically oriented and likely to be beneficial would be more appropriately valued and understood in terms of its potential benefit in the short, mid, and long term.
Thank you. That's clarifying. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the question.
Thank you both. That was great. Artie has a question. I'm going to ask my question first in number 3 here. So I know Kitchener and Nanaimo, Nanaimo. I don't want to mess this up, but I know those are two of the municipalities you worked with. Have you worked with others outside of those two? And how large are those two municipalities, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Kitchener is, I think, growing on maybe 250, 300,000 people. So it's a solid mid-sized city, but very urban in nature and quite innovative. It, it's definitely perhaps more like a big city than its population would suggest in terms of, its high tech sector and so forth. So quite a sophisticated city. We've never worked with a really big city per se, and I don't know that that would be the best fit for us. At the stage we're at in terms of experimenting, testing, and learning about how EE applies in practice, I think the complexity of like a massive enterprise with, 10 different layers of management and so forth would probably be beyond what we're capable of navigating at this point. Just changing management systems in a smaller space is complex enough and certainly was a challenge with Kitchener. Nanaimo is, so yeah, you were close, but not quite. It's Nanaimo. They're, I think, emerging on like, they're somewhere between 100 and 150,000 people. And we've just started working with the City of London, similar size to Kitchener, and the township of New Glasgow, which is small, so closer to 5 or 10,000, I believe.
What going back to this question now, Randy. First, Artie, did that answer enough of what you're asking on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just very quickly, I think, power being devolved as close as possible to city residents is really important, but you also have to make sure that there's the capacity and funding for it to be effective. And yeah, 250, 300,000 is probably a little chunk of a city like Bombay where where I've lived, and has all sorts of challenges because it's got so many power is fractured across so many different levels of government in that particular case. But I have seen bottom up citizen participatory approaches within the city, which I think work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Nikki, I know you're going to be next. We've only gone through one question, guys, and there's like 33 after. So I'm going to try to go through this a little bit faster here. So Randy, for the two municipalities, what do you feel enabled the deep buy-in from the city leadership places? Like where were their aha moments and how did that sort of evolve? If we can do that timely, fast.
Yeah, let me give me a second to think about where to start. In the
Sure.
case of City of Kitchener, I'd originally connected with their sustainability lead who heard our stories and basically said, look, you need to talk to our head of strategy. I think she's going to be really interested in what you're talking about. We chatted. She quickly recognized that doing strategic planning in the way that we were interested in helping them would necessitate change beyond her mandate and influence. And she said, well, if we're going to do this, we need the entire corporate leadership team on side. So we co-designed a workshop series, 3 half-day workshops. This happened at the beginning of the pandemic, no less. So everything got put on delay. And then eventually she convinced that corporate leadership team to do these 3 half-days in the midst of the first wave of the pandemic when they were in emergency response. Not because they had time, they were totally overwhelmed, but because it was a good reason to consider that the future emerging required them to do some serious rethinking and that this needed to be prioritized. And they were game, which was fantastic. So we did the entire thing virtually, which we had never done before. I had never met any of these people. And we essentially just had a conversation. So it was interesting because from a program design perspective, it was critical for us to be working hand in hand with the head of sustainability and strategy who knew that team well, who understood the dynamics, the people in the room, the history of what happened. And so the exercises that we designed, the conversations that we held were very much tailored to the individuals in the room and the sorts of experience that the Kitchener corporate leadership team has had over time, which is very critical to the success of this. It's not a generic sort of learning approach or program. And so inside of that space, to make a long story very short, we had them very vulnerably share anonymously through a survey their own experiences with their history of strategic planning. And I think some of the results or outcomes probably wouldn't be too surprising to anyone in terms of how they felt and the vulnerabilities they're feeling about their ways of planning and navigating the future. which allowed us to then introduce some macro level perspectives about how the world is changing and why from a sustainability standpoint. And to make the point that things are really logically only going to get much, much worse. So they could either sit on their hands and wait till the walls cave in, or begin experimenting with us and learning smartly over time to adapt their own capability as an organization. We worked them through a practical exercise where we took something they did in a past strategic planning process that our partners in co-design had helped us to identify, had them use a couple of systemically designed innovations to revisit those challenges. They had a very different experience of what was possible when they had a systemically designed management innovation to use as a way of making sense of things. And they turned around like maybe 5-6 hours into our engagement. So like 2/3 the way through our second workshop, and basically said, look, if what you're saying is you have a whole suite of innovations designed in this manner that are just going to help make things explicit, help us build a shared understanding, help us to confidently know that we're identifying all the things that matter in line with the things that we say we're committed to, like we'd be silly to balk at this. Let's start the process of experimentation. And that's really what allowed for that change to happen.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That was a great answer, man. And you're doing great with this time on this. I appreciate it. I know we're getting condensed here.
No problem. Thanks.
Nikki, we'll go into Nikki's question, and then Deborah had a question in chat. We'll go into next. Which
Hi,
I don't ever hear anymore though. So hopefully she jumps back on. Go ahead, Nikki.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to step on you there, Sage. I had two questions. Like I know that Catherine asked about the biotic pump. I'm curious on two things. So point one, how often do you find them organically thinking about human rights in regards to the leadership and so forth? And my second one is more asking about if you're familiar with the collective imagination practice and how that's being used in businesses and governments in the UK right now. Also, there is a way for people getting together and collectively dreaming things bigger together than they ever could alone in regards to the solutions and systems and so forth they're designing or otherwise bringing forward.
I apologize. I just got lost in your imagination reference. What was the first part of your question again? I lost it there.
That's okay. How often these leaders organically
Yes.
bring human rights into play?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have the sort of breadth of experience to generalize at this stage. I think most municipal leaders, from my experience, are grounded in reasonably strong ethics. Most who are in the public sector have, avoided or taken a pay cut to work in the public sector versus in the private sector. And they usually do it for a purposeful reason. Not always, but that's often the case from what we hear. That said, I just read an interesting piece. So one of our collaborators, we just did a webinar with the Center for Public Impact, and reimagining government. To your point about imagination is sort of their raison d'être, their reason for being. And one of their leads just posted an article on how there's this insidious and very inobvious way that ethics in a municipal environment are breached unconsciously. The way that the system is designed kind of naturally leads to like undervaluing how some individuals might be mistreated because of how the system points focus and priority and metrics of success, et cetera. So when we have these business-oriented ways of functioning, it's so deeply rooted and ingrained in the system that ethically oriented and purposeful individuals can overstep. Did I just lose everybody? Oh, sorry, my computer just flipped. Yeah, it can I guess create harm in ways that, one, they're not aware of, or they just don't see or value insofar as they probably would if that was put right in front of their face. So I think it's complex. It's hard to answer that question. I think most have an ethical foundation, a strong ethical foundation, moral compass. I just think it ends up being subverted or suppressed in some ways just because of the environment and the challenges of getting the job done, so to speak. And in terms of imagination, it's interesting you mention it. I guess one of the things I love about this enterprise evolution frame is it is not static, right? So for us, we're on this journey of kind of learning what fits. So this
Mm-hmm.
exploration of what would contribute to an entity becoming more evolutionary in practice and nature in an embodied way. And so creative practice certainly would contribute to our ability to envision new futures, to see possibilities that are maybe less obvious, to innovate, etc. So things like creative practice, tools, methods, whatever they may be, that would encourage or enable more creative practice are interesting for sure. And while enterprise evolution isn't prescriptive in terms of the individual solutions that one might deploy, what we try to do is establish a standard for what sorts of solutions, tools, pieces of knowledge fit within the frame and are compliant or don't. And that's really kind of where we draw the line.
Got it, got it. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a collective imagination practitioner and get called in
Mm,
once in a while on sessions about, activism and so forth. So I was just wondering about that because it's a territory that I've felt intimidated by, but then I'm like,
mm,
wait, I'm not there to like make any suggestions. I'm just there to guide. So yeah,
mhm.
I'm curious to see if that's already being done, but thank you.
Yeah, and if you have any links to specific approaches or tools or even your own work, I'd be happy to look more closely at it. That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Nikki. Next question is from Deborah. So Deborah was saying this is fascinating. Can you talk about the bioregional aspects of what you're doing in the municipal level? And that might fall into some of what we're saying with civic rights as well. So I think it's going to be similar along the lines of the same answer, but I'll give you a chance if you want to approach any aspects of that question a
Of
little differently.
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. And hi, Deborah. Nice to see you. I guess, one of the things that I'm often a little bit sensitive about is people hear enterprise evolution and they hear systemic management and they think it's a very inwardly focused orientation. But the thing is, when we understand the management of an organization through a systems lens, the first thing that becomes apparent when you're recognizing you're part of a complex adaptive system or many nested layers of complex adaptive systems is that you're not in control. And the way to ensure the best possible future for yourself is to be concerned with the health of the system as a whole and to navigate smartly and effectively. That also necessitates engaging collaboratively with other actors to enable and ensure system health. And one organization's mandate fits within a broader scope of sustainability and regeneration that is held within the system itself. So for me, bioregioning or a bioregion represents essentially the smallest useful scale at which we could, in theory, achieve sustainability. So it's a very useful boundary, whereas a municipal boundary is an arbitrarily drawn geographical kind of limit. And I think as we engage in conversation with municipalities, my hope it's happened in some cases, not entirely in others, that a systems lens leads them to being curious about the concept of a bioregion and that as a frame or boundary around what they're concerned with or primarily concerned with in terms of the future that they're trying to create and how to optimize their own management practice. So I think the bioregion sort of concept and frame is a really useful one and one that is immediately relevant.
Deborah, any feedback real quick?
Yeah, that's so helpful. I'm just wondering if you can give an example, like of where there's been an impact on the bioregion.
Of course, yeah. So, from the perspective of authenticity, let's say like being authentically concerned with regeneration or sustainability, flourishing. If I'm a municipality and I'm concerned about the well-being of my community, as much as that might be defined based on an arbitrarily drawn geographical boundary, the question is, well, what does it, how are we performing today, right? That, like, how does one municipality know what to do strategically if they don't know what the vulnerabilities, the shortcomings, the strengths of the health of their community happens to be? So if we take the example of the availability of fresh water, right? That fresh water is not, the availability of fresh water is not decided within an arbitrarily drawn geographical boundary around a municipality. It's drawn based on the system that functions within a watershed. And so if I'm a municipality, for me to have any authentic understanding of the sustainability or the availability of water for my constituents and the businesses that are reliant on water, et cetera, I need to be concerned with the renewable annual capacity of the watershed that we are reliant on. And as part of that, I also need to know all of the other actors, all of the other cities and institutions and businesses outside of the boundary of my community that are reliant on that watershed. And then I would be concerned with designing some sort of fair, just, and proportionate mechanism for dividing the capacity, the annual capacity, which fluctuates year over year and based on routes, the capacity of that watershed, so that I can say that here's what our fair share is, that everyone else agrees is an appropriate fair share based on some sort of agreed mechanism. And we could say, are we sustainable or not? And by how much? So if you're not doing that, and if like pretty much every municipality on the planet, you're just going, well, we'll just reduce our water consumption by 15%, or we'll reduce our water consumption more than municipality A and B that we compete with, like you're just flailing in the wind. There's no real strategy to it because we don't know if we're unsustainable or not, and by how much. And to give you the most clear example, Nanaimo, who we worked with, which adopted the Doughnut economics method, which is our model, along with its guidance, which isn't very useful for making sense of science and ethics-based thresholds at an organizational or community scale, due to the lack of depth of the guidance. They had developed the goal of reducing their water consumption by 30%. And when we engaged with them, helped them to see that didn't make sense. And when they actually investigated the capacity of their watershed, what they found out was that they happen to exist inside of a rainforest and that they're nowhere close to the carrying capacity of their watershed. So consider for a moment from a strategic perspective, their water consumption is already sustainable. We're in the midst of an emergency, like a flat out human and worldly emergency in several other areas. So if I'm a senior leader in an organization, I want to be aware that spending even $1 on reducing water consumption while we have emergency level risks in many other areas is completely irrational. And so the way of managing today is like we just spend money to do better across all the different areas of impact, irrespective and without an understanding of sustainability performance against science and ethics-based thresholds. It's completely irrational. It's devoid of strategy for the most part. I mean, of course, there's some sense we can make just based on like how things are happening in the world. If there's lots of people who don't have homes, we have an idea that there's an issue there that's irrefutable. But to really be grounded in some sort of more scientific and equity-informed method of making sense of sustainability performance that we can actually be strategic is very necessary. And again, the bioregional frame is a useful one.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Deborah. Catherine has a question. So guys, I just put in chat, we have about probably 11 minutes left here, and we do need to do a little bit of planning for next week. So I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions. Randy, you're doing awesome, and you have everyone hooked at the edge of their seats here. So thank you so much. So Catherine first had a question about your Doughnut economics experience, and can you sort of, this could be a very long discussion. So if you can summarize sort of where your struggles with it when you came into it and how you were able to work through that, please.
For sure. Yeah, I'll be brief in that. I think what there is to recognize is that both the Doughnut and the SDGs represent an important shift in that I think they both acknowledge the importance of science and ethics-based thresholds as part of pursuing sustainability, that we need to move beyond incremental change and the sort of feel good we're making a difference ESG-like corporate sustainability practice that has defined the last couple of decades of how we've pursued sustainability or regenerative futures, and actually ground ourselves in what is sustainable and not, and having meaningful understanding of how to determine what that is. And so the challenge really from my perspective lies not so much in that perspective that suggests thresholds are relevant. Like the Doughnut economics model and the SDGs are brilliant because they've brought this idea of thresholds to many people for whom that might have been complicated or difficult to grasp. So in terms of shifting a mindset, they've been hugely influential and really valuable. But then they themselves, both the United Nations and DEAL, from my perspective, haven't really grasp the complexity involved in implementing or making sense of thresholds at lower scales, and in a manner where if we were to aggregate the threshold that we have at every level, from an individual or an entity like an organization or a community, all the way up to a province, a state, a country, in the world, that we would then know that we would have all had our part in such a way that in total we would have the possibility of achieving sustainability. That's really where the complexity lies. So as it happens, my colleague has been working, he's a management accounting professional of over 30 years who quit his job as a partner with KPMG, spent a decade working with Donella Meadows, came up with the concept of multi-capitalism and developed a method called context-based sustainability. This came well before donut economics or the SDGs existed, and is an operationalizable version of management accounting that essentially treats all forms of capital the same way, and in a manner that a CFO or a senior leader in an organization would understand, that would just make sense for them. And so when we worked with Nanaimo, it was essentially to help them see the inauthenticity in what they had done by using the guidance available, and to navigate towards authentic sustainability, as in operationalizing or localizing science and ethics-based thresholds in a very different way. So I'm happy to share some resources and let you guys learn more about context-based sustainability in Nanaimo, et cetera. I've got lots teed up that Sage can pass along, or we can pass along after the session.
Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah, no problem.
All right, everyone. My next question was going to be, can you explain how context-based sustainability differs from the ESG and SEG metrics? So you already jumped in on that one. So that hit that one. That was fabulous. Guys, we have time for maybe one more question in chat. I don't see anyone putting in there. So I'm going to start wrapping this up for now with a PS that we may have one more on here. That being said, Nikki on cue. Okay, Nikki, come on out. Very quickly, just to make sure I have enough time to close this out, please, ma'am.
I just want to feel, I just want to know what you feel was your best outcome, like the best like cohort you had. What was like the most like, yes, we've got this moment you've had?
You're on mute, Randy, just so you know, sir.
Yeah. I think it was probably with the city of Kitchener. And I mean, there's two things I'll mention quickly that are very much ingrained in how we understand enterprise evolution, or the way that it works now, reflecting on a few experiences. So one is that like transforming any facet or area of management in isolation is in itself incrementalist. So from a systems perspective, if you change part of a system without adapting the rest, you don't get the benefit, the potential benefit, because the other parts of the system are non-compliant. So for example, if we develop strategy for the future in a systemic way, but the data inputs and how we understand our performance currently isn't systemic, what informs our strategy development is going to be quite flawed, right? And this is very much the case with the city of Kitchener. Now, another part of it is that the process is quite emergent, right? So there's a lot of experimenting and playing with the adaptation of practices. And through that process and the experience of doing things differently, hoping that the leaders who are part of that process and practicing differently hand in hand with you start to just develop a new way of making sense of things. And it wasn't predictable for us, but we made change to performance management practices, public engagement practices, and planning practices. And it was the end where we started to see, like the end of 2 years of engagement, where we started to see things just pop that we couldn't have predicted, that we didn't tell them to think. They just emerged as conclusions or ways of thinking. And I think the most significant one in the case of Kitchener was their recognition. So historically, and much like most municipalities, strategic planning is a process of engaging the public on yet another planning process for envisioning the future, but one that's very much focused on the public's involvement. And typically what they would do is come up with 4 years of actions at the onset. And what they recognized was inauthentic about it was, for their strategic plan, they try and implement everything on time and on budget. But for them, they saw that 90% of what ended up being strategic wasn't reflected in the plan that they developed 4 years ago. It all changed 6 months later because they couldn't anticipate the kind of major changes, complex issues, and challenges that emerged over time, given the nature and state of the world. And so they came to this conclusion and embraced the idea that strategic planning wasn't a planning process as much as it was a meta-level process of setting strategic priorities that would shape and influence how the rest of the organization and planning process would be considered. And that process of strategy, that living, breathing process of strategy, was about understanding priorities based on a continued connection to the emergent needs and opportunities that exist in the community and with the constituents that they serve. So it emerged as this living, breathing, flexible process of making sense of conditions rather than a static deliverable.
I love this. That was just a great answer. Nikki, great question to end that one out.
Well
And
done.
Randy, way to take it home, man, leaving people wanting more and more. Um, First off, Randy, would you be willing to come back and do another question or a part two at some point? Not, when your schedule permits, because I do believe we left a lot of questions on the table that I think overall the whole ecosystem might really benefit from.
No, I'm kidding. I'd love to. Sounds great.
All right, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Y'all be on the lookout for a part two that will be coming sometime TBD in the future. Randy, I want to flip the scales here. How can the GRC as a whole, with GRC as a global, massive structure, how can we help support your mission?
Yeah, great question. I guess there's a few ways. Everything we do is collaborative and generally designed to be developed as a public good. So enterprise evolution, for example, at the moment, as you're aware, Sage, we've designed a development project where we've engaged about 40 different organizations and experts through our network who are collectively and collaboratively doing work to further develop the program. So it's more than like ideas that I have in my head that we've articulated through a bunch of experiences into something replicable and something that others can be trained to deliver, et cetera. So as an example, you could get involved in the development of EE and be part of the next sort of group of professionals, expanded group of professionals that will bring that out into the world. In any case, point of the story is that what we do is entirely collaborative. Definitely work on a network basis. So if you see opportunities to engage with organizations, leaders, maybe you don't have the narrative or the specific innovation that you need to help them out, so happy to provide some advice or direction or to collaborate with you on something like that. And then from a research standpoint as well, if any of you guys are academics and if you publish, if you're interested in that kind of work, it's very much within our sphere as well. So yeah, don't hesitate to be in touch. Really, collaboration is the name of the game, so to speak.
Randy, what's gonna be the best way that people can reach out to you? LinkedIn, email, what's easiest for you, sir?
Yeah, LinkedIn is fine. I'll put my email in the chat though.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Artie's already planning questions for the next call. For the next call, I'll be very interested in digging deeper into the donut experience. I think everyone wants to learn more about the donut experience, especially because there's been so many difficulties in trying to successfully apply it into systems. And the way that you've done this, it naturally and organically evolved. And that's the part that's so refreshing. And because of that, you got so much immediate buy-in from your groups on there. It's phenomenal. So, what kind of collaborators or case studies are you hoping to find right now? If we were to get into your ecosystem, where are your biggest needs right now?
Yeah, I think perhaps our community is more biased towards pure management practices versus the more relational practices around or practice innovations, knowledge around leadership, culture, kind of the softer areas of that would fit within the enterprise evolution frame. So if that's reflected in your own area of expertise or interests, all the more reason to reach out.
If someone wanted to shift, this is our final question, an institution or a municipality's mindset, where do you think they should start?
Contact me. For me, the bridge is about navigating complexity. I think regardless of where someone's kind of beliefs are and what they're pursuing, if their commitment is to their mandate as a leader, which means stewarding their organization through the future. And I think most any leader in most any sector in most any place in the world is currently being challenged by the level of complexity that they're trying to navigate. And if we can hook into them by helping them to see why that complexity is overwhelming them and create an awareness or an understanding that maybe best practice is no longer so fit for purpose and that there's an opportunity to move towards existing and more future-oriented innovations, you might have enough of a hook to continue.
I love it. I love it. Randy, thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate you coming to the GRC Regenerative and Iteration session, if I can get my own meeting out. everyone, we don't have a guest or a visitor for next week or an interviewee. So if you want to put someone in chat real quick, this is your way to nominate a business or an organization or an individual. I have from weeks previous already started reaching out to some of these groups, and I have some future calls starting to get set up. But I need those leads. Who do you guys want to have in this room here? Who do you want to learn from? Who do you want to help evolve? What you're working with. Who do you want to have in this room? So please throw it in chat. Randy, same thing for you as well. If you think there's another person that we could really benefit from having in this group, we'd love to hear that too. So please jump in. And you guys can come off of mute and discuss this. We are 1 minute over. I try to end these on time. I don't have a hard stop today, so I can't stop. I can hang out for just a minute if you guys want to talk about who we should have next. I'm here for you. So with that, the meeting's over. Thank you guys so much, and stay around to give me some inputs. Thank you.
So
What do you think,
Sage, I
Catherine?
think we should have more information on context-based sustainability. So maybe Randy could bring his guy in on that. Would be very interesting.
Okay. Randy, was that Anthony that worked on that one? Who was the
No, it's Mark McElroy is the
Mark
individual.
McElroy? Okay.
He's largely retired now, but myself and my colleague, if any of you know Bill Bowie from R3.0, he's heavily involved in kind of stewarding the development of context-based sustainability with me and several others.
Oh,
So yeah,
nice.
we could definitely talk about it. And Mark might be interested as well. It's just his time is pretty limited these days in terms of how much he's contributing towards things like this.
Yeah, I think anyone knowledgeable on that would be great. So we trust who you recommend on that. Anyone else? Deborah, anyone you want to see come in here? You're on mute.
I'm going to give it some thought. I'll send some ideas.
That's fine. You can find me on Slack, and there
Okay.
is a GRC Regenerative Iteration channel on Slack as well. So by all means, you guys can go on there and look at that as well. Randy, anyone else you think that would be good for our session, as far as you kind of get the idea of what we're doing in this, and we're just trying to build commons and lessons learned for successful programs that are getting fielded out there.
I mean, Anthony would be a natural choice, but it sounds like you probably already got a hook into him, yeah?
I do. I'm getting ready to have a one-to-one with him, so I'll talk to him specifically about this. What do you feel where Anthony's genius would be? He sounds like a very, very bright guy, but where should I ask, do you feel?
I think his focus on the Flourishing Business Canvas is probably it. Like,
Mhm.
you could start by
Okay.
introducing the canvas and its genesis, much like EE, and then speak to some of the ways that he's applying it through different methods and approaches that have been developed as a way of operationalizing it in practical terms.
Okay. Deborah, I have a meeting with him in like 2 weeks, so we might get him in here, but it might be a little bit, just so you guys know. Dennis, you're off of mute as well. Did you want to throw something out there?
Not at this time. Thanks. Great show so far. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to need to hop myself to my next meeting, if that's all right.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Anyone else? Michelle, do you have anyone else you want to see come in here and for us to interview?
If I could just say a quick thank you myself,
Sure.
Sage. Really appreciate you coordinating everything and preparing this session. It was really lovely to connect with your colleagues and to be immersed in this forum. It was a lot of fun, and it was really nice to connect with all of you. So thank you for the interest and the time and space to dialogue.
Thank
All
you,
the
sir.
best.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
Talk
Thank
to you all
you.
soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, y'all, another great meeting. So that was awesome. I hope I didn't rush it too much on this one. It's hard to get through some of these and with these great questions. So Michelle, Dr. Brian, I haven't heard from you much. Dr. Brian, it might be too early on your side, but if you have anyone you want us to look at or interview, please throw it in chat or come off of mute. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Michelle said not at this time. Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, well, let's close this out then. Great facilitation. Thanks, Deborah. I appreciate it. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you next week. I'll find someone for next week. If not, we'll interview one of our local GRC members, and we'll learn more about how they're changing the world. So we'll definitely have a good one for next week. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.